What's going on, everyone? It's Ben at YGO from Zero, back with another LOB format video. After the last video I put out of the Aggro mirror match, I thought it was only right to show the other end of the spectrum of decks in this format, which is Exodia. Now, Exodia is not an aggro deck, it's a stall deck. The win condition is to grab all 5 pieces of the Forbidden One in your hand, at which point the heads effect will let you win the duel. So it plays quite differently from the aggro deck, and it can actually beat the aggro deck fairly consistently, which is a bit of a problem of this format in my opinion. Like always, if you watch the guide and know what the deck does, then you can just skip to the duels. I've put chapters in the video, so you should be able to find where the duels start. And you can just skip ahead to them if you don't need the deck breakdown. But for everyone else, I'm just going to give a quick breakdown of what the deck is trying to do, how it accomplishes that, and why each card is in it. So, as I said before, the deck, its win condition is to get all 5 pieces of Exodia in hand, and at which point the effect of Exodia, the Forbidden One, will win the game. So of course we're running all 5 pieces, but you might be confused as to why we're running 3 copies of each piece. Because you might think, well, if you draw more than one of the same piece, that sort of gums up your hand and it's kind of a useless draw, right? Shouldn't we be playing 1 copy of each, so that way we can play more power cards in our deck? Well, the reason we're playing 3 pieces is that drawing duplicates in this format isn't actually too bad, because you can always set a duplicate piece as a potential defender just to block 1 attack. Now, of course, it will die to pretty much any attack that hits it, but the monsters are at such a low power level in this format that even blocking 1 and, preventing 1 chunk of damage being taken away from you, that can potentially be the difference between life or death. So playing duplicate pieces isn't actually too bad for our purposes, and playing 3 of each piece makes it more likely that you'll draw into Exodia. Because if you're playing 1 of each piece, and one of those pieces is the bottom card in your deck, then you just lose the game, right? Because there's no way you're going to be able to stall out for 35 turns or so, because there's just too much removal in this format. Whereas it's a lot less likely that there will be 3 of the same piece at the very bottom of your deck. So it's a lot more likely that you'll be able to draw into Exodia at some point when you play 3 of each piece. And that's why we're playing 3 of each. Now we get to the non-Exodia cards in the deck. We of course have our defenders here, just 2k defenders, great at stalling your opponent. Monsters can't attack over them easily, so they've got to use some of their form of removal. So these guys can just be great, just sticking on the field and just buying you time. You might wonder why we didn't go for more defenders, instead have Man-Eater Bugs here. And the reason for that is Man-Eater Bug trades with an opponent's monster, so it's depriving your opponent of resources. And you really don't want your opponent to have more monster resources, because if they've got enough monster resources over the course of the game, then they'll potentially be able to deal enough damage to you to make you lose. So that's why we're playing all 3 Man-Eater Bugs here, and just defenders for the rest. And that's really all we need for the non-Exodia pieces. We're not trying to attack in, so we don't need any beat sticks. We're not trying to get rid of Swords of Revealing Light, so we don't need like an armed ninja or something. We just need stalling, and we need killing, and that's what we've got. For the spells, we of course have our removal spells, Raigeki, Dark Hole, and Fissure. These are great at depriving your opponent of more monsters, which, as I said before, is what we need to do in order to stay alive. We of course have Pot of Greeds. In a deck that's trying to draw specific cards, Pot of Greed is an MVP. Just digging deeper in your deck for those Exodia pieces, digging for cards that can get rid of your opponent's monsters and keep you safe. It's incredibly good. And for the last spell, we of course have Swords Revealing Light, the ultimate stall card in this format. Prevents your opponent from attacking for 3 turns, lets you draw 3 more cards, and it's just incredible. Very, very good. It does die to Armed Ninja, so we always have to sort of play with that in mind, but it's just an incredibly good card. And if you play right, then Armed Ninja isn't as much of a threat, and it's still good to include. And then lastly, for the traps, we have Trap Hole. Just like Maneater Bug, these trade for your opponent's monster resources, so they're very good. And then we've got the side deck. The side deck is actually a smokescreen into an aggressive strategy. And what I mean by that is, at the end of the first game, your opponent might try and combat the Exodia strategy by siding into a more aggressive strategy, taking out maybe their Swords Revealing Light and Trap Hole, because you're not going to be summoning monsters when you're just trying to draw into Exodia. And, you know, throwing in more Armed Ninjas, throwing in more cards specifically targeted against this sort of strategy, like Stop Defense. If we side into an aggro strategy, taking out all 15 Exodia pieces and swapping them in with beaters, swapping them in with slightly more defenders, monster reborns, stop defenses, if we side all these in, then we can really take them by surprise and sort of be playing aggro versus an inferior build of aggro. So this can be really killer in games 2 or 3 of the match, because you can just completely surprise your opponent and just steamroll them with the better deck. That's the card by card breakdown of this list, and you might still not be convinced that this is so good, but I think the games will really help convince you, because once you see this deck in action, then it's just, you understand the absolutely disgusting potential of this deck. So let's dive right into the games. Okay, our first game here is against Tenurg again, and we're playing Exodia, they're playing Aggro. This game is really to show you how good the Exodia deck can be at just stalling out and buying enough time to draw the pieces. So let's get into it. We're going first, and you always want to go first as the Exodia player. It's 1 extra draw, which is just incredibly good. Incredibly good. We have opened 2 of the Exodia pieces in our hand, which is a pretty good start. We also have Swords Revealing Light, which is very good. A Trap Hole, just stopping our opponents from being able to summon, and a 2k Defender. This is about as good an opening hand as you could have. So we're just going to start by setting the Defender, setting a Trap Hole, and passing to them. This insulates our life points pretty well, because they're probably not going to waste like a Raigeki or a Dark Hole on just 1 monster. So this is pretty good insulation. And if they do have a stop defense, summon a beater, you know, we've got the Trap Hole. So they're going to activate Swords. That's a pretty good play from them. If this is a Maneater Bug, then we just lose it, and they preserve their monsters. So that's pretty good. Unfortunately for them, it's a Giant Soldier of Stone. They don't have anything to deal with this, so they're just going to set a monster of their own. That's pretty good for us, and we just drew another sword, so that's even better. We'll be able to stall very well when they actually do manage to get rid of this Giant Soldier of Stone. So we're feeling pretty good at this point. We don't even really have to do anything else. We can just leave the game as it is, because we've got plenty of stall potential for later on. We don't need to waste it now. They're just going to set another monster, and we can see here that it's a Maneater Bug, and we can probably assume that in the actual game, because there isn't really a reason why they'd set another monster, unless they want to get more damage on board, which is fair. Of course, we're just fine with things as they are. Again, you know, we've got more stuff to follow it up with later, but right now they haven't removed this Giant Soldier of Stone, so we're feeling pretty good. They do manage to remove the Giant Soldier of Stone now with the Maneater Bug, and they'll summon out a Skull Redbird to follow it up with. Great beater, great follow-up, and we lose 1/4 of our life points, which is pretty bad. But again, we've got the situation well in hand. We can just dark hold those 3 monsters away and then just set a Maneater Bug. And this is very good. They could have another stop defense or Swords Revealing Light or something to just get rid of this Maneater Bug. But if they don't, this trades 1 for 1 with a monster, and we still have our swords for later turns. Their sword expires, and they do have the stop defense, which is kind of unfortunate for us. But again, it's not the worst thing in the world. This is pretty bad. They're dealing a lot of damage, but again, we still got 2 swords, so we're sitting pretty. That's not exactly what we wanted to draw. You know, we have another potential defender now, or at least a blocker for 1 attack, but we would have preferred to draw like a board wipe to make the swords a bit safer of a play. We do have to activate the swords though, just because. And we set the head just to sort of bluff that it might be a Maneater Bug or something. If they want to use removal on this, then that's great for us, because we don't really care about keeping the head on the field. So we might as well do it. And they just pass the turn. They're not committing more to the board in fear of a board wipe, which I think is smart. And we draw our 4th piece of Exodia, which is pretty good. We just need 1 more piece, and we already have another swords in hand. So this is just incredibly good for us. We don't need to do anything else. We can just pass to our opponent. And they don't really want to commit another monster to the board. They're just waiting out the swords, because they don't really have anything else to do. Swords just stops the game in its tracks, which is why it's such a great card. We draw, and there we go. All 5 pieces in hand. It's as easy as that. So we just won that very easily. Now, in this match, I don't actually side into the smokescreen aggro strategy. I could have anticipating that they were going to side into a more targeted Exodia hate strategy, but I just wanted to just kind of leave it as is. I didn't think they were going to side into that. It's one of those things where in this format, you can't really know, and it's kind of one of the worst aspects of the format. Just so much of how the game goes is determined by what people choose to side into, like what strategy people choose to side into, and it can be a bit annoying. But I chose not to side here. Who knows if that was the right choice or not? We'll find out. They are going first. Or no, wait, we are going first. I'm not sure why they had us go first, but we'll take it. The Exodia deck definitely wants to go first. Maybe they had us go first so they could have the battle phase just to get in a bit more damage on us, which I think is fair. But I think the Exodia deck so wants that extra draw that it's just it's worth going first against them in the second match. But we have Pot of Greed, so we draw 2. Our hand is looking okay. We again have 2 pieces, a defender and a Swords Revealing Light. So we're feeling pretty good about this. We're just going to set the defender and set a bluff. And they open Pot of Greed as well, which is pretty good. And they do have a stop defense for this, which is pretty bad for us, since we don't have any way of actually protecting this Giant Soldier of Stone. There's no trap hole or anything like that. So we will lose our defender, which is pretty bad. But it is better than having a Maneater Bug destroy itself. And we do draw a Pot of Greed, which is incredibly good. And we draw into a trap hole, which is also incredibly good. So we'll just set the Maneater Bug, set the trap hole, pass back to them. We're feeling pretty good about this whole thing. They set a monster and then attack, which I think is a bit of a tactical misplay. Because if this is a Maneater Bug, we're always going to hit the set monster. And it's an armed ninja. So we've managed to get rid of a potential safeguard against swords. So I think it probably would have been better to lose the Witty Phantom in that case on their end of things and then set the armed ninja if they so chose. But I understand potentially baiting out the removal on the monster that's not the offensive powerhouse on the board right now. So I can see why they do that. But I think in general it's better to save the Armed Ninja. So we're looking really good here. We've got a Fisher to deal with that Witty Phantom. And we can just pass back to them. We've got full life points. If they want to use up some Monster Reborns now, that's fine. They can, yeah, they've got a Beat Stick, but we've got a Trap Hole. So we can just clear that away and prevent them from sticking a monster on the field. And we have a second Swords of Revealing Light. So we're feeling really good here. We set a bluff, a Dark Hole bluff. But they do have Pot of Greed, so they get some more resources. And they do have another beater in Urabi. So we will take a little bit of damage here. But we're feeling really good, especially since we just drew a third piece of Exodia. And we've got 2 swords, a bunch of board wipes. It looks like nothing in this game could go wrong from this point. They set a monster, and since we have so many board wipes and an Armed Ninja would really mess up our day, we will just clear that with a Dark Hole. And then just set the other Dark Hole that we drew. Because there's no real reason not to. They do set another monster, and this time it is an Armed Ninja, so that's pretty good for them. They'll be able to clear the swords. Unfortunately, we just have so many board wipes that we can feel free to use the Dark Hole on the Armed Ninja, just to keep our swords online for just a little bit longer. And they'll set another monster, but now swords is expired, so we don't really need to fear an Armed Ninja. And we drew a Defender, so we'll just set it and pass. They do have stop defense for this, which is pretty rough for us, but, you know, there's not much we could do against this. We don't have a Trap Hole, and they're just going all in for damage, which is pretty unfortunate. We're going to take a lot here. But when you don't have the Trap Holes, this is what happens. You could argue that we maybe should have saved the Trap Hole that we used earlier on the first Skull Redbird for a situation just like this. But I think that it was right to use it then, just to clear monsters from the board, prevent anything from sticking, and prevent a bit more damage. They do have a Swords of their own, which they're just activating now. There's no point, really, to activating it or keeping it. It's just sort of a dead card in this matchup. So we have swords, so we'll just activate it. We don't have anything else really to do. We might as well wait for them to commit another monster to board before using our Raigekis to clear away everything. So we're just going to pass again. We're getting kind of unlucky with these pieces because, okay, there we go. Now we're sitting pretty. We've got 4 pieces in hand. So all we need is the last piece. All we need to stall for just a little bit longer, and we're sitting pretty. And let's see what happens. They do set an Armed Ninja, which is pretty good for them. We've used up 2 swords, so we could still have the third, especially given the amount of cards in hand. And if we do use the third on this board, then we're going to get massively punished. But unfortunately for them, we just have a Raigeki. So that clears it all away. And they've used up 1 Monster Reborn. So we don't really need to fear too much a just sort of Monster Reborn play out of nowhere to kill us. So we're feeling pretty good. They do have a Dark Hole to clear away our set. And they do have a Monster Reborn here. And luckily they can't kill us just yet. Which is what I was kind of saying. You know, even if they had a Monster Reborn, it wouldn't kill us necessarily. And we're doing pretty good on pieces. So we draw a Trap Hole, which will buy us another turn as long as they don't have another Monster Reborn. And so we just set ahead as a blocker. They have Raigeki, so we've gotten them to waste some removal. We can Trap Hole the Aquamador. We really just need to draw that last piece and then we're all set. But unfortunately, we do not. So we just have to set another piece to hopefully block just 1 more monster. We do manage to block the Celtic Guardian, but we're really on our last legs. We do have Fisher for that, but there we go. That's the perfect draw right there. We can swords, just block 3 more turns. They'll set a card because they don't really have anything else to do. We just really need to draw that last piece of Exodia, and then we're all set. And the swords will hopefully buy us the time to do so. But we're just not drawing it. It's looking bad. We just wall up. You know, they've used one Raigeki, so they probably have another, but we've got to prepare for all eventualities. We just got to hope that they don't have a Raigeki. And our swords is finally gone. We drew a Fisher, so we can at least, you know, kill their Celtic Guardian with 1 Fisher and feel okay about it because we've got another for later. But they've got the Raigeki, and they can just get in. And that's the end of the game. And this sort of shows one of the problems with Exodia, is that you're playing all 3 pieces to mitigate the possibility that you won't be able to draw into all 5 over the course of a game. And we drew pretty deep into the deck. If the right arm was in the top 27 cards of our deck, we would have won. But unfortunately, because the deck is in a random order, there are cases where we just can't draw into the pieces because they're just all the way at the bottom of the deck. And yeah, the first right arm that we could get was 31 cards down. So there was no way we were going to win this game, even though we played pretty much as well as we could have. So there was nothing we could really do about that. And in the siding, they didn't side super aggressively against us game 2, so I'm just going to keep the Exodia build that we have. Not going to smoke screen side again, and hope that this time one of the pieces won't be over 30 cards down in our deck. Okay, this is a pretty good start, but especially given the Pot of Greed into a Pot of Greed, it's very good. So we're essentially starting with two pieces, a Defender, some Man-Eater Bug, the Sword Revealing Light. This is pretty much perfect for us. We just set a Man-Eater Bug, set a Fisher, and luckily they don't have a Stop Defense or a Swords. And we're just too good. We draw into another Pot of Greed. We draw a duplicate piece, but, you know, we've drawn deeper into our deck, so it doesn't really matter. And we're able to pop their Man-Eater Bug with ours. We get in for a little bit of damage because why not? And then we'll just set 2 and pass. We set this duplicate piece here because if they have a Fisher, this prevents them from getting into our life points. And again, it's something we don't really mind losing. So, their turn. They will stop defense this piece. And it's pretty funny because, you know, it doesn't die, but it's basically no shield of our life points because its attack is so low. So they can get in for pretty much full damage. So that stop defense was pretty bad for us, but at least it blocked 200 damage, so that's something. We draw a third piece. Feel pretty good about that. We set another Man-Eater Bug, which, you know, might be a mistake, but we figure if they're stop defensing the Exodia piece, then they probably don't have like a Raigeki or a board clear that they're willing to use. So we might be able to get off this activation of Man-Eater Bug. They do have a Raigeki though, so, you know, it's kind of just unfortunate. And they will summon out another monster to bring our life points down a fair bit. But we've got the swords. We've got some backup plays, so it's looking pretty good for us. We set the Man-Eater Bug because if they set a monster like an Armed Ninja, the Man-Eater Bug will be able to answer it. So I figure it's a pretty good play to set. That was a misclick right there. And they just pass. They don't have anything to do against this, which is pretty good for us, especially since we just drew our 4th Exodia piece. So we've only got 1 piece left. We're in a pretty commanding position. We just set a trap hole because why not? And it passes to us. We draw a Defender. It's still pretty good. We pass to them. This is the last turn on Swords. And Swords dies. We drew a Fisher, which is pretty good. We can clear away their entire board with our Fishers and Man Your Bug. And we get in for that all-important 450 damage, just chipping away at their life points. Because why not? They do set another monster, and they activate a Swords of their own. Again, the Swords isn't that best in this matchup. It can fiend out Man-Eater Bugs, but we're not attacking at all. So Swords doesn't really do anything against us. So we're feeling pretty good that they're activating Swords, because it means that they don't really have much. And we'll just set another defender. We've got enough defenders in hand. If this dies to a board clear, then we're feeling pretty okay about that. And it does die to a board clear, but we do have trap holes, so we might as well use them. Especially since if they have 2 monster reborns in hand, then either of those monsters getting summoned out would kill us. So we just use both trap holes preemptively, and we do draw the last piece, which is the end of the game. So that was a pretty good example of the Exodia deck. Just, you want to save your most powerful stall tools for when you absolutely need them, and you just want to use the duplicate Exodia pieces to sort of bait out removal, bait out attacks, prevent your opponent from getting in with the maximum amount of damage they can, and generally that's good enough. So that's a good example of how the Exodia deck plays and why it's not generally the funnest deck to play. You just kind of can lose for no reason if you have a piece that's just all the way down in your deck with no chance of being able to get it. Even when you win, it's just kind of not fun. You're just kind of preventing your opponent from doing anything and just biding your time, just hoping that you'll draw the pieces that you need. So it's kind of, I don't think it's a very fun deck to play, even though it is somewhat skill intensive. Like, you do need to use your cards at the right times, at the times that maximize the amount of draws you'll be able to get and the amount of turns you'll be able to stay alive. But I just think it's kind of like a degenerate strategy. Just unfun for the person who plays it, unfun for their opponent, and there just aren't really any good counters to it. But let's get into a game where I actually do smoke screen side, because I think that will really show how this deck can even take out decks that have specifically thrown in Exodia hate in them. Okay, we've got another match here against Kane, playing the Aggro deck against our Exodia deck. And we did manage to win the rock, paper, scissors, so we are going first. And again, we have a pretty decent hand. We don't have a defender this time, but we still have 2 pieces, which is generally you want to start with 2 pieces. And we have a trap hole and a Man-Eater Bug, which are honestly good enough. So we just set the Man-Eater Bug, set the trap hole, pass to them. And they set a monster of their own and just pass to us. No bluffs or anything. Which, you know, bluffs don't really do anything against the Exodia deck since we're not summoning anyways. We just pass to them because why not? Now, I think that this is a bit of a misplay here. So their face down card is a Man-Eater Bug. So they can just flip their Man-Eater Bug to kill our monster without having to use up a stop defense on it. I do get why they did this, because they're probably figuring that if this was a Man-Eater Bug, we'd probably just have flipped it up on our turn to kill whatever set monster they had. So I get why they feel safe doing this, and then they can save their Man-Eater Bug for later. I still think it would have been the safer play just to flip up their Man-Eater Bug, because by doing this, they're going to get majorly punished, because we will be able to get off our Man-Eater Bug effect and kill their Man-Eater Bug. And, you know, we will take damage here from the Skull Redbird, but we've deprived them of a resource, And we've actually kind of deprived them of 2 resources because they had to use a stop defense and a man-eater bug on this. So that was a pretty good trade for us. And we draw a 3rd piece, which is just excellent. We Fisher the Skull Redbird. We don't set out any of our pieces because we don't have any of their duplicates. So we want to just keep them in hand. And a Pot of Greed does come down, which is pretty good for our opponent. But it looks like they don't really have any monsters to hit into us with. So that's pretty good from our perspective. We still don't really have any defenders or anything, but given our opponent doesn't have monsters, we don't really need them. And it looks like they drew a monster, but not a monster that they can attack us with. So we're feeling pretty good about that. And we're feeling even better now that we got a 4th Exodia piece. So we just Raigeki this because we've got another Raigeki in hand, we've got a Fisher, we've got a Trap Hole, and we've got 4 Exodia pieces. So we might as well just clear their board. And then we just pass to them. They, again, still don't have monsters, which is pretty good. And we finally drew a duplicate piece. So we just set it, because why not? We don't really care if we lose it to a board clear or something. And it's at least getting rid of some of their removal. Yeah, so they do use a board clear on it, which is good for us because now they're not using that board clear on something like a Giant Soldier of Stone or a Man-Eater Bug. They finally do have a monster, and they will be able to get in with that monster. But that's honestly not the worst for us. We do have a Fisher to clear it away on our next turn. And we drew a duplicate piece to then act as a blocker for whatever else they might bring out. They Swords, hoping it's a Man-Eater Bug, but it's just an Exodia piece. So it will actually retain blocking status. And they do have a Urabi, but you know, they can't get into our life points. So that's pretty good. And we just drew the best card in our deck, arguably. So we're going to activate Swords. They're just going to sit on that Urabi because it looks like they still don't have anything. We drew another duplicate piece, but again, we've got Swords, so it doesn't matter. They are going to commit a Skull Redbird, which I'm not sure how I feel about this, because I think it's just setting up the board for my board clear at the end of this. But I also understand wanting to get more damage on board for when the Swords does expire. But I think they probably should have saved the Skull Redbird. And their Swords expires, which doesn't really matter at all for us. We do set one... We set one Exodia piece just to sort of have a monster on board. If they want to waste removal on this, they can. They bring out another monster, and we're feeling really good about that because we can just Raigeki away. But first we will Pot of Greed, and bombs away on the Raigeki. Their entire board's cleared. They've got 3 cards in hand, so it's not really likely that they have too many more monsters to be able to do anything with. And we have another Trap Hole to back it up. They have a Dark Hole, so they will clear our Exodia piece, which is kind of what we were hoping that Exodia piece would do. And we draw another Pot of Greed, which is just insane. And that is the last Exodia piece that we needed right there. So we do win the game. Now, in this sideboarding process, I was talking with this player, and so I knew that they were going to side into anti-Exodia. In general, you've just sort of got to have a read. Now, this can be sort of... You can read into how long they take to sideboard, but after a while, a good player could just potentially pretend to be siding into something and then actually not side into that. So, you know, it's incredibly hard to read the sideboarding process, and you kind of do have to get lucky. But I do side into the sort of aggro smoke screen in the hopes that they're siding into a weaker sort of sideboard, which is correct. And this is a not bad hand for us. They start out with a Urabi, which is a decent enough beat stick, and they'll pass it back to us. We unfortunately have our weakest beat sticks in the Witty Phantom, but we do have a Pot of Greed to hopefully draw deeper. And unfortunately we don't, but we do draw a Fissure. So we are able to get in there with our Witty Phantom, cut them down a bit, and then set a trap hole to protect it. They have a Witty Phantom of their own, and a Monster Reborn, which is kind of rough. We were hoping that the Witty Phantom would just crash into our Witty Phantom, and so that's why we didn't use the trap hole on it. But they are able to get a Urabi to clear away this Witty Phantom and then attack in with their Witty Phantom. So that was pretty rough, but we did draw a Dark Hole, and we also have a Defender. So we're sitting real pretty here. If they do manage to remove our Defender, which is likely, they're probably playing a lot of stop defense. If they do manage to remove our Defender and attack in, we're still not at risk of lethal, and then we can just Dark Hole on the follow-up. So that's feeling pretty good. They do use a Raigeki on that, and we take a lot of damage here. But ultimately that's fine. We're still alive, and we have this Dark Hole. And we have a sort of mini beat stick in the Witty Phantom. We can summon out, protect it with a trap hole. And this is looking pretty good for us, even though we're at such low life points. They draw, they just set a monster, and we draw Raigeki, so we're just able to get in for even more damage. You might have thought that that's a bit aggressive, just going for that one set monster, but again, we are now an aggression deck. We're an aggro deck now after the smoke screen, and we want to just get them as low as possible because we have a trap hole. We're summoning pretty weak beaters, but if they summon out another beat stick, we can just protect our monsters and then get in for lethal now. So we're feeling pretty good about this. We set another trap hole just because why not? And it looks like they didn't have anything. They just had a bunch of weaker monsters that they sided into to hopefully prevent our Exodia plan from going through. But we sided into the aggro strategy. So that is how it is. I hope that sort of showed off why this deck is so powerful against sort of even against just hard counters to it. Because when someone tries to make a hard counter to Exodia, you just side into the hard counter to that hard counter. And you can feel pretty good about your chances of winning there. So I do think that the Exodia Smokescreen deck is the best deck in the format. And it's the best deck in kind of a not fun way because it can just smokescreen into a very powerful deck when you try and counter it. When you're playing the regular Exodia deck itself, it's just not fun to play against and it's not fun to win with. So I do think it kind of is the reason why this format is pretty bad in my opinion. But there are people who like this sort of playing strategy, and I don't begrudge them that. And if you like that sort of play style, then you might like this format a lot. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's video. I am planning on having some duels where I'm playing aggro against some Exodia players, just to give you sort of an idea of how I would play in that situation, how I think an aggro player has to sort of play against an Exodia player. But again, there's not much an aggro player can do in this situation. It's just kind of like Exodia just steamrolls the competition. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more like it, then please subscribe to the channel. I'm planning on putting out more like it. And if you had any feedback on it, please comment down below. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.